My name is Chad Stewart. My colleague, Anand Sankey, also with Facilities Management. Today, we're going to try to balance this out. So the microphones are actually for the benefit of the live stream. So we're going to try to project our voices during the presentation, but just note if it feels like the microphone isn't working in the lecture hall here, it's because it's not, okay? So today, presentation of the results of the Space Utilization and Facilities Condition Assessment. For those of you who do know, and those of you who don't, we are going into the start of a master planning process here at Western Michigan University. That's really defining what our built environment wants, what we want it to be in the near future, and then the vision for the far future. So these two studies, the results of them, really feed into that process. It lets us know what our most utilized facilities are, what our least utilized facilities are, what our condition of our existing facilities, where we'd have to put the most investments in to bring them up to today's standards, what meets today's standards that we can kind of leave alone for a little while. So it kind of feeds into that whole master planning process. And so we'll present the results of these studies and then give you a chance to ask any questions at the end. With that, I'll turn it over to Anand.
Thanks, Chad. Hey, I'm sophisticated. They gave me one of these. How am I doing at the back there? Thank you. Good evening, and good evening to those individuals that are online. Let's plan for about 20 to 25 minutes of a presentation, unless I decide to ramble on. And then what we would like to do is really engage in a conversation, feedback, questions and answer sessions. So I'll try to keep it to about 20, 25 minutes. For today, I will do a quick recap on what we have done for the last 12 to 18 months. We'll go into the reasons of why we decided to initiate this assessment, the findings from the assessment, and what the university has decided with its next steps. We have partnered with a company called Sightline. Sightline is a company that is not an architectural or engineering firm. Its primary responsibility is to perform assessments. So they have no vested interest in the future of what we do with buildings, whether it's rebuilding, renovation, and so forth. That's not what their business plan is. For the most part, most universities either engage in space utilization or facility condition. Western has decided to take both on at the same time. And it's two very different data sets. But when we move forward with our decision-making processes, we will be using both data sets. I was fortunate enough in the last 1 year to travel to a few conferences. And in those presentations and conversations I've had with our peers, I can tell you that our peers are still trying to figure out how to get this done. We are far ahead than most of our peers with the reason that we need to do this assessment. So many times you've heard, are we on the bleeding edge or leading edge? I assure you at this point in time that we are on the leading edge of doing this assessment. So a little bit of the timeline for the last 12 to 18 months. A request or proposal went out in May. In September of 2022, we went into contract or business partner with Sightline. You might have heard Sightline or Guardian. Both are interchangeable. Guardian is the parent company. Sightline is the company that specializes in the assessment. In January and February of last year, we actually did some sessions with various groups across campus on the reasons of why this assessment is important. In March and April, a group from Sightline came on campus and started performing an assessment of facility condition by visiting all the buildings and having conversations with the registrar's office, with OIT, and so forth. While they were here, they also did on-site interviews with students and faculty on what their experiences have been in classrooms. After they gathered all this information, and you can only imagine the volumes and volumes of information that they collected, the information was actually needed to be verified. So they met with OIT, registrar, facilities management's team to make sure that the information that they collected was accurate. Then they took the information back and started analyzing the data. And in September of 2023, they presented the preliminary observations and recommendations and next steps from the assessment. So why did we embark on this assessment? This is a representation of our square footage and enrollment on campus over the last few decades. You will see that our square footage continued to go up as we built buildings. However, our enrollment of students started to drop from 2003. Some of you might remember in 2003 we peaked over 29,000 students. We're currently hovering around 16,000 plus. It wasn't until recently, in the last 2-3 years, that we've been proactively taking measures to reduce our square footage, such as the raising of Wellborn, the Draper Complex, the Burnham's Complex, the Little Three. Some of you might know the Little Three, but it's the French Zimmerman, Davis, and Davis dining. Overall, while it is quite depressing to see the blue dotted line continue to drop, nationally in the last 7 years across the country, colleges and universities have lost approximately 1.5 million students. Here's a conceptual illustration from APA. APA stands for Association for Physical Plant Administrators. This is the troubling national trend that is currently going across the nation. Enrollment will see a slight increase till about 2026. And then you'll see a drastic drop till about 2040, and these are national trends. And the reason for that is because the pipeline of high school students are decreasing. So naturally, the number of students going to college will decrease. If enrollment decreases, revenue will decrease proportionally. Unfortunately for us, the need for facility spending is going up. Buildings are getting older, which means we need to reinvest in the buildings, which means our deferred maintenance numbers or cost is going up or needs are going up. We all know that material and labor cost is going up, and the uncertainty with energy to heat, cool, and light campus. While that's going up, the allocation of actual operating dollars is going down, and that makes sense because revenue is going down because enrollment is going down. So all of this is creating a situation where the university has decided that if we stay the course, it's not sustainable. So the assessment is one way for us to make a cost correction. Now, I'm going to pause for a little bit here because, as I mentioned earlier, there's two parts to this assessment. There is the space utilization and there is the facility condition. As far as the space utilization, the university has decided to break it up into 3 categories. Teaching spaces, you can define it as classrooms and classroom labs. The second category is research. We're in the infancy stage of identifying what research definition is. Is that external research? Is that internal research? And so forth. So we've just started the conversations with people who are involved in research in order to collect that data. And the third category is if you take teaching out and research out, that leaves us with offices, meeting rooms, conference rooms, study rooms, and support areas. What is excluded from this space utilization will be lobbies, hallways, bathrooms, utility closets, custodial closets, OIT, mechanical, electrical rooms, and so forth. For the purposes of today's presentation on findings and next steps, we're focusing on teaching spaces, which includes classrooms and classroom labs. So, Sightline findings are as follows. There are a total of 387 teaching spaces across campus, which includes all of Kalamazoo campuses, the Battle Creek Aviation Facility, and the downtown Grand Rapids area. The 387 teaching spaces are in the registrar's database. There is an additional of 157 teaching spaces that are college controlled. So overall, campus has 554 teaching spaces. This particular slide has a lot of information. Most of you will be looking at the blue line now. Ignore the blue line for a while. I'll explain that to you in a few minutes. Take, for example, South Corman, which is the third building to the right of the graph. These are all the buildings that we consider to have teaching spaces in. The brown bar is how often classroom rooms are utilized in 1 hour increments between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. So South Corman has a 17% room utilization. The must is how many seats are available and how many seats are actually filled by students. So let's take hypothetically this room has 150 seats and it's 75% occupied by students. That's a 50% position utilization. The data includes 4 semesters. It's the 4 major semesters of fall, spring, spring. We excluded summer 1 and summer 2. The blue line is not a national standard or a guideline. It's a goal where Sightline, who has about 450 to 500 clients across the country, have come to an agreement and general consensus that is 70% room utilization and position utilization is an acceptable goal to try to achieve. Now, let me average it out for you if you include all these buildings. Overall, Western Michigan University from Monday to Thursday is at 37% room utilization. Anyone want to guess what happens after 5 o'clock on a percentage? Those of you who have heard this presentation before, excluded from that. We're at 20%. Anyone want to guess what happens on a Friday? What the percentage is? Close? We're at 8%. Summer 1 and summer 2, we generally stay at 15%. Another observation that Sightline made was that classroom enrollment has become misaligned with available spaces. We have too many large classrooms and small enrollment class types. And this has happened, I think, over a few decades. And in my opinion, there are a couple of reasons why this happens. One, I think, is that we've seen a decline in enrollment since 2003. So obviously, the classroom sizes have become smaller. 2 is I think we have gone into a different learning environment. It's not what it used to be in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Today's learning environments are different. It's more hands-on, it's smaller groups, and so forth. The third, I think, is part of COVID. COVID forced us to get into a hybrid teaching environment, whether it's online or in person. So all of these factors contributed towards this. So we pretty much need to do a course correction here as well. Density factor. For a 4-year comprehensive university, with our peers, we should be at about a population of our size and our type of campus. We should be, Paula, is there a chance you can close that door for me, please? For a 4-year comprehensive university, we should be on an average 400 people per 100,000 square foot. Western is currently at about 200 people per 100,000 square foot. So many of you might consider that to be a good thing because we have more elbow room. However, it comes with a cost because we have to maintain all the square footage. Remember I mentioned that we had some interviews with students and faculty? These were the common threads that we found from what students thought needed to be better in classrooms. This is what faculty thought we needed to do better in classrooms. Now I'm going to shift from space utilization to facility condition. Facility condition is all about the assets in the building, whether it's the roof, the windows, the chillers, the heating system, the cooling system, and everything else that is inside a building. This is a 5-year cost of where we've invested on campus. I want you to focus on two colors here, the dark blue and the dark red. The dark blue is building systems, the HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, electrical, plumbing, and elevators. To give you a point of costing, an elevator costs anywhere from $300,000 to $400,000 to replace, and we have well over 100 of those, and their general life expectancy is about 25 years. In the HVAC realm, a chiller to cool a building, we have 20 of those, and they cost anywhere from $1 million to $1.5 million, and their life expectancy is about 25 to 30 years. We have been investing strategically in those areas and those infrastructures, the heating, cooling, and so forth. The other area where we've been strategically investing in purposefully is the dark red, the space renewal, the carpet, the paint, the light fixtures, and furniture replacement. I can assure you that that area where we are focusing on has been in classrooms. We've been investing in furniture, new carpet, new lighting, new paint. We've also focused on bathrooms and hallways. Wherever there's teaching spaces, that's where we've been inserting our limited funds. So, if you look at general fund, student affairs, and athletics, which constitutes the 6 million square feet, 92 buildings that we audited, the largest need at the moment is HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, because it is the largest component within a building. What you see in the black, it's what's past due in HVAC. The red means that in 3 years, everything that's in red will turn black, and subsequently. So it's just a compounding effect. Now, if you break it down to just general fund buildings, we are currently $258.4 million backlogged. And in 3 years, we'll add $45.3 million to that. This is not sustainable based on the current funding model of how much we get to maintain general fund buildings. On the student affairs side, there are about $100 million in backlog. This slide was created before the decision was made to not renovate, but replace Valley 3. Is that right, Tim? Now, once Valley 3 goes offline and off the books, that backlog will shrink because currently Valley 3 has a huge backlog. So that number will change. Now, student affairs would have had a bigger backlog, but they got rid of Burnham's, Draper, and the Little Three, and the Burnett Center, soon to be gone. And so that has helped their backlog, and that's why you see the 1 to 3 years is much smaller for them. On the athletic front, their backlog is $28.5 million, but they also have a smaller footprint on campus. Their footprint is about 491,000 square feet. Most of their backlog is at Lawson. If you take a couple of artificial turfs that they need to replace and a couple of digital scoreboards, Lawson is the biggest chunk of where their backlog is, and they have some needs at University Arena. So with all that information that we gathered in September through December, the senior leadership and the Space Advisory Committee basically decided that we need to move forward with some action items. They created somewhere between 2 and 3 task forces. The first task force, chaired by Chris Cheatham and Sarah Nelson from the provost office, will be looking at optimizing our classroom utilization. Should all classes, whether it's managed by the registrar's office and by the college, be centralized into one database? And then who manages the classroom scheduling? Should we be looking at scheduling classes where capacity aligns with the number of chairs that we have so we can increase our position utilization? We need to understand what technology is available with the concept of high flex classrooms, the room configuration, the condition of the room, the safety, and the geographical location. And finally, what do we do with Fridays and summers? Do we continue to keep all the buildings currently in operating conditions with the 15% in the summer and the 8 or 9% utilization on Fridays. So that's their charge, and they have a timeline to provide a recommendation, which is by the end of spring of this year. And they are to provide it to two groups, I believe. One is the Space Advisory Committee and eventually the Cabinet, and the other one is to feed that information into the master plan. The second task force is to look at maximizing our strategic investment into our physical assets, which are our buildings. That task force is being chaired by Carla Koretsky, Dean of Arts and Science, and the group is a representative. They've been charged with developing guidelines on what determines if we raise, hibernate, or decommission a building. I'll give you 3 examples of what the difference is. Henry Hall was hibernated, meaning that we put it to sleep, but with the intention possibility of bringing it back online if we needed to, and that is what we're doing currently. Vandercook is decommissioned. We have no intentions of bringing it back online, but we didn't have the dollars or the funds to raise it at that point in time. And the Burnett Center is what we're doing. We took it offline and we're raising it immediately. So that's the 3 different types of definition of what that means. There's also an annual report that goes to the state that says how much of money we need in order to renovate a building. They've been tasked of putting that list of recommendations for the state capital outlay. And finally, come up with 1 or 2 buildings that we should decommission and a modest renovation or high renovation need for a general fund building. They have already begun meeting, and they are to provide the recommendation by December of 2024. And finally, we have the Master Plan Task Force. Their goal is to develop a vision, mission, higher elevation concept to align with the strategic goals of the university and to understand exactly what buildings and programs that we need for long-term planning and aspiration goals. They have a timeline. They've already started the process of meeting with various groups on campus, and they are to provide their recommendations to the Board of Trustees December of 24. With that, I think I could probably open it up for comments, questions. We're gonna have to have the microphone with you because.
Thank you. I'm Angela Brecka from the University Libraries, and you had mentioned that you were showing us information about instruction, teaching spaces, classrooms. Are the task force groups only looking at those spaces right now, or all of the spaces that you talked about?
Currently, the Task Force A, which is focused on increasing our teaching spaces utilization rate, is only looking at teaching spaces because we haven't got a good handle on research. And the other category, which is offices, study rooms, meeting rooms, conference rooms, and everything else. So the focus now is teaching spaces.
Working? Okay. Maybe it's just worth adding that the second task force, we are looking more holistically, but data on things like usage of non-teaching spaces is harder to come by. So that's going to be a conversation on our task force, is how do we handle that? We're working on that now in terms of that task force B, the space optimization, and thinking about guiding principles for how do we decide when to renovate, when to decommission a building. And clearly part of that conversation is usage of all the space, not just the teaching space.
Thank you. Forgot to add that.
What was the percentage of use from Monday through Thursday again?
37%.
37%, okay.
During the full semesters.
Right.
It is. As far as the information provided today?
Yes.
Oh, there's a lot more. I had to condense it to 20 minutes.
So I think this is going to be more of a comment than a question, but as someone who teaches and who's someone who has just this semester asked to have my room changed because it was small. There was a desk, or there was a chair for every single student, but they were like right on top of each other. And I knew that the room next door was empty, so I asked for it, and now they can spread out a little bit. They're mostly together, but there's a few blank spaces here and there. Is that problematic, right, to do that? Because it seems like it affects your statistics or your numbers when a smaller class is in a slightly bigger room, right? But if the room is empty, it shouldn't matter.
Correct. So
Okay.
if you changed rooms and the 25 Live picked up your change, then it is included in the data that we provided because it's accounted for. As far as the density of a room and how cramped position utilization, because we feel at this point in time, and this is generally the consensus across the nation, is that no longer do you need to fill an entire room with all chairs filled. 70% seems to be a reasonable, acceptable number where 7 out of the 10 chairs are filled. So what you did is perfectly fine, and it's good as long as the registrar picked up on that move.
Oh, yeah. No, I went through all the official channels to do it.
No.
But I guess I was just wondering, like, will there be pressure moving forward? And you've just explained it is not, so I'm happy to hear that. I wondered if there was going to be pressure moving forward to stay in your smaller room to make the numbers look better. But you've just made it clear to me that that's not the case.
No. Correct.
So with 8% use on Fridays, what costs would there be associated with like hibernating the entire campus or something like that, or the teaching spaces on the campus?
So there's a cost avoidance. You want to take it or you want me to?
You can answer as well as I can when it comes to that question.
Why don't you go ahead and take it, and then I'll add on if need be.
Yeah, the data itself is largely an input. So, the committees are going to create some guiding principles to that. So all of those questions, over time, one of the tasks, if you saw Task Force A, is actually figuring out how we can actually get better at getting the most accurate data. So, this is really the start. We're kind of in a crawl, walk, run type process here. So when those types of questions, those will become more apparent as we go year over year and we start to develop the master plan and those overarching principles that Carla was talking about as we move forward. So they really can't be answered at this point in time.
I know this is outside of your bounds, but what do you think's going to happen?
You haven't said much. You want to say something?
Thanks, Anand. No, that's a good question, and that question goes to our master planning process. That's sort of the essence. So what's going to happen? What do we want to happen? That's the future of Western. So hopefully all of you will come to the master planning processes and put some thoughts or input and ask those questions about what's going to happen. What's our future look like? Certainly we want to right size, but right sizing to the number of size classes means we make a conscious decision on what size classes we want to instruct. I mean, you probably have an idea of what do you want when you teach, and I don't know what you are instructing on, but you probably have an idea of how many people you want in that room to do that, and the goal is to then give you the right room along with the technology and all the supports to do that. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah, there's going to be a number of opportunities over the next year. One is next week, where we have an open session workshop on the 28th around noon, 11:30 to 1:30. You can drop in at any of that time over in the Student Center in the central part, and you'll see big signs and everything, and you can just come in, sit down at the tables, you'll see us, and then kind of get up to speed on what we're talking about and what you want to talk about, and you'll be able to provide that input. Or in the evening at 5:30, we'll be there again. And then in April, it'll either be the 10th or 11th, we'll be back again, and again back in the fall on there before we try to wrap up before December. So there's a great number of opportunities to hear what's going on and to provide that input.
So maybe it just helps to say a little bit about conversations in our task force so far. So we've just started on the path of guiding principles, and I think the conversation has really been around how do we align with who we are as a university and our strategic plan. So thinking about how do we support academic excellence? What does that look like in teaching space? How do we support healthy communities? How do we support inclusive buildings? How do we support sustainability and energy efficiency and carbon neutrality? How do we support our research enterprise and make sure that we really have the right space to align with us? Have also had the conversation that probably what that looks like is less space and better space that's really aligned with our modern needs as opposed to older space that really doesn't align with the strategic plan, if that helps at all.
Kind of a random question, but you said you're excluding lobbies, hallways, bathrooms from space utilization, but all of that does factor into HVAC costs and usage costs. So how do you working with that?
For the most part, we were looking at assignable spaces, which constitutes about 6,000 spaces out of the 14,000 that we have on campus. A lot of what we're excluding is code required. There is very little we can do to remove bathrooms, hallways, stairwells, the utility rooms, the custodial closets, the OIT, and so forth. So for the most part, those are just factors as part of a building, and so there's very little we can do. So we were focusing on assignable square footage.
Okay. So I guess then with classrooms, would we be looking at just shutting down certain classrooms and cutting them off from HVAC systems, or it's more about still taking whole buildings offline?
It's both.
Okay.
And it's based on how the task force approaches it.
Okay.
But we have the ability to set back temperatures, turn off lighting, not clean a particular space. Less wear means longer life for the particular areas. So a carpet usually will last 8 years before it gets replaced. And if we use it less, then we could extend it to 12 years. So that's one strategy within a building. Obviously, taking an entire building offline is the most it's the most beneficial, whether that's in hibernation or whether that's decommission or raising. So there's savings in both options, and I don't think it's one or the other. I'm hopeful that the task forces will come out possibly with combinations.
Okay. And just to add to Anand's comments, so the actual space utilization, yes, is focused on teaching in classrooms, but when it comes to the facilities condition assessment, it's looking at the building in its entirety. So it's really, we have to maintain those spaces the same way we'd have to maintain a classroom. So it's not looking at just the conditions of the classroom. That factors into that backlog data that Anand put up. So so that is a more holistic look when you really look at the facilities condition in general.
Well, you guys bought my time for an hour, so keep going. Honestly, I have to tell you that I am, while it was sobering, I have to say that in my conversations with my peers, in my travels and so forth, we're just fortunate that we have the ability to move this initiative forward, to understand what we have, because there are so many universities that understand there is a need to do this, but they can't get off first space. Is that a good analogy?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not a good sports person.
Another one. So I don't know if this is true or not, but it seems like we're still coming off of COVID doing way more online teaching than we have historically done in the past. Are we going to somehow take that into account? And I don't think it's a safe assumption to say that people will stop teaching online, but how are we thinking through online teaching in classroom space? Because I think it's a huge factor.
I think you're more closely related with.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. It already came up in our task force because I don't think any of us has a crystal ball to know, is the mix of online, in-person, high flex that we have today what it's going to look like in 2 years, let alone 20 years. So I think we're just doing the best we can in kind of looking at what was the data pre-COVID, what does the data look like now in terms of utilization, and then it's a little bit of guessing for the future. But we've definitely talked about that.
Any other questions? Well, if there are no other questions, I just want to thank you all for coming today. Thank you to Anand for presenting the outcome of the study. And take care.
And if you enjoyed it so much and you want to hear it again, it's 9 o'clock tomorrow morning here again. Thank you.
Thanks, Anand.